My name is Chris Smith, and I'm founding director of the Vernacular Music Center at the Texas Tech University School of Music.
I'm Roger Landis, and I'm the associate director of the Vernacular Music Center.
I direct the TTU Celtic Ensemble, which is now an ensemble of winds, brass, strings, and percussion, and has become such a large ensemble that we now have an alter ego as well as full orchestral representation, and it's called the Elegant Savages Orchestra.
I direct the TTU Balkan Music Ensemble and also the Cap Rock English Bagpipe Consort.
Well, the process for this show began really with the inspiration of a building and an idea for a partnership. At the Vernacular Music Center here in Lubbock, Texas, we're always looking for community partners, and we're also always looking for interesting spaces that suggest interesting ideas for dancing or performance or presentation. And that's really where it began. It began with our introduction through a mutual friend to the folks who run the 501c3, which has the historic Wallace Theater movie house in Levelland, Texas.
A few years ago, I guess about 5 years ago, we were invited by one of our colleagues at Media and Communications, who at the time was curating the Flatlines Film Festival over at Luca here in Lubbock downtown. He invited us to collaborate, the VMC and the film festival, and we had the idea to do a new score that would be performed live by a student ensemble for the 1922 classic vampire film Nosferatu. And so Chris and I wrote that music and put together an ensemble made up of members of his ensemble and a couple from mine, and it went really well. And so when we met the folks at the Wallace Theater, they invited us to come out and perform that again. It was a few years later, and we did, and had a great time performing that 1920s silent in a 1920s film palace on the windswept plains. And we had such a good time, they asked us, "Have you got anything else you'd like to do?" And so we started dreaming. On the way home, we got to talking about that space, that building, the theater space inside of it, and what did it suggest to us.
Yeah, and in this kind of theater, it's called site-specific. Sometimes it's even called site-inspired. And the reason is because it's not theater that's designed to be played on a traditional proscenium stage. Instead, it's theater that's presented in unique spaces. And since the Vernacular Music Center is always presenting music and dance in these various kinds of situations and circumstances and venues, sometimes we just let the space itself suggest things to us. And so the Case of the Yonder show is that. It's a site-inspired show because we started thinking about the Wallace Theater and its history and 1928 foundation. And then we started thinking about the kinds of characters who might interestingly interweave in that space. We're driving back from Levelland, laughing hysterically as we riff on this idea. And then really, I can't give away the story, but Roger's the person who had the initial sort of opening scene that kind of popped into his head, and he shared it with me. And we were laughing hysterically, and I'm driving around the tumbleweeds and trying to stay on the road. And so the way I describe it is the building kind of told us the story that it wanted us to tell.
Yeah, we felt very much invited in on that first experience with Nosferatu, and then when they explicitly said, "We want you to do something else in this space," we thought, well, there's different options. And Chris knew that he wanted to do something that would involve his ensemble, the Elegant Savages Orchestra, which through various means has become, there's an alternative history part to it. There's also kind of a cosplay aspect to it. And because there's this alternative history and also the possibility of time travel with that ensemble, and some of the backstory for the ensemble, he's created this really elaborate set of biographies for people who participate in the ensemble, and many of whom move on. They have a tendency to graduate and go get jobs, and so there's this wonderful backstory literature that he's created with kind of this alternate frame that he borrowed from me and another friend, this country called Bassanda, and you can read about that online. But so we had a bit of a frame, some elements that we thought we could put into a frame that we would kind of a conceptual frame that we would construct with the Wallace in mind. And so given that, and given the time period, the fact that the Wallace was built in 1928, refurbished I think in 1947 or 49, somewhere around there, and is going through a restoration now. There are parts of it. You can see the 1928 bones. You can see the 1947 kind of neo-frescoes where they painted the stucco when they added the air handling system in the ceiling. And so it's this beautiful space, and you can see several decades all at once on its surface inside. And so that kind of helped inspire this thinking about alternative times and alternative histories, and maybe bringing some of those streams together in a nexus that, in Levelland.
The other thing we had was we had some young artists here at the School of Music and around the campus, and alumni and friends of the VMC who we really wanted to work with. And we thought these are people who would get this sort of immersive, collaborative story. And so we began to think about who we might recruit as cast before we ever really knew the story, really before we had characters. And that's the part of it that in the theater world, and sometimes in contemporary dance, they call devising with a capital D, which it comes out of experimental theater, and the idea that instead of writing the story and determining the cast and then having casting calls and auditions and deciding on the cast and then rehearsing and then they go out and they execute your story, which is a venerable way to do theater. Devised theater is about getting a group of people in the room and, as much as possible, in very complete ways or modified ways, saying to the people, let us compose this story together. Let us arrive at this tale together. And it's a great way to learn. It's a kind of model that goes back in lots of different arts and music traditions for millennia. You learn by doing, you project-based learning, you apprenticeship. So the story has become more and more deep and more resonant and more eloquent and more tragic and more triumphant because of the ideas that each of these actors has brought to their role, and saying, well, I feel like this is the background of my character, and here's how I move with this other character, and suddenly other aspects of that backstory are revealed. And I keep saying things like the building told us what to do, and the backstory is revealed. And what I mean by that is, we're not writing it, we're creating a space in which it can be written.
To me, the message is that without community, we can't survive. And that if the community can be thwarted, but if it has a chance of surviving, it's because people stick together and rely on one another and know each other. That's kind of a vernacular message. If you think about the way human beings have been living for the last 40,000 years, it's pretty important that we rely on one another. And I think that's a message that bears repeating, especially in today. So.
Yeah, I'd say for me, some of the messages for Yonder are still being revealed to me, honestly. But I would say for me, I would certainly echo what Roger has said about community and sustainability and caring for one another. To me, it's also, in addition to those very powerful values, it's about how in the midst of darkness and alienation and loss and loneliness and sorrow, courage on behalf of oneself and one's community, and compassion towards oneself, but also towards one's community, but also toward the entire many universes. That courage and compassion are absolutely eternal, absolutely essential qualities of the human. I hope that audiences take away from this experience a sense that art is for everyone to make together, that art making, participating in making art, believing in art, being creative, that creativity is a fundamental human right, and it's part of the inheritance of what it is to be a human being, that you are allowed to be creative, you can be creative yourself, that creativity is important, that, you know, like clean air and clean water and freedom of worship and freedom of belief, basic needs security, that creativity and making is an absolutely essential part of being human, being healthy, being a human and healthy community, and that we can all be advocates for that, for ourselves and for others.
Yes, I agree with that. And I hope that people take away that no matter how isolated they may feel or how strange they may feel as a stranger or in an unfamiliar place, that there are values, human values that can bring us together across or against what may seem like insurmountable odds, and that yes, sticking together is really our only hope.